It's 7 o'clock on a Sunday night. You know what that means. It's Topical starts right now. A very good evening to you, South African, and those watching around the world. My name is Blaine Herman, and this is It's Topical. Our digital audience with us tonight, they're going to pop up on your screen in a short while. There they are. It's good to have them on the program. We're going to get their questions for our guests in a short while. The African Growth and Opportunity Act, signed into law by former United States President Bill Clinton back in 2000. So it's been, over 2 decades, right? And you've probably heard of the acronym AGOA in the last 20 years or so. But, like me, not really paid attention to the benefit for yourself and your family until now. Why? Because it's on our doorstep. The AGOA Forum taking place in Gauteng this week. Remember the Lady R saga? It threw this acronym into the conversations around the supper table. What effect will it have on our relationship with America? Is there a chance that we might be yanked out and not benefit anymore? Those are some of the questions people had. So our aim tonight is to break it down, break this act down into bite-sized pieces, get a better understanding on its impact. You'll remember US President Joe Biden has informed Congress of his intention to terminate the beneficiary designations of 4 African countries from the African Growth and Opportunity Act. So Biden will remove the Central African Republic, Niger, Gabonese Republic, and Uganda. Why? As beneficiary sub-Saharan countries that have had duty-free access to the United States. What's the state of play regarding South Africa's continued participation in AGOA? We will discuss. Remember, this recent forum, was intended to map the way forward in terms of trade relations. Which leads us to our question of the week. And we're asking you, what kind of opportunities do you expect following the conclusion of the 20th AGOA Forum? Let's walk and talk, get you some context as always. How comfortable of a vehicle has AGOA been for workers, for industry, for business in general? And to what extent does AGOA drive economic growth and industrial competitiveness? We will discuss. Let us know at It's Topical SABC. Perspective coming up. All right, the agreement provides access for manufacturers and producers in African economies to, large, important markets in North American markets. What's the specific impact here in South Africa? I remember Ambassador Catherine Tai, who is the U.S. trade representative, saying that South Africa has been one of the largest AGOA users, and she was saying that we were the top exporter in 2022 with about $3.6 billion in exports. So what does this all mean for me and you? Let's get you some context. And as always, we'll turn to the magic wall and bring in my guest tonight, Nompumelelo Ziziba, SABC News Economic Senior Reporter. Good to have you on the program, ma'am.
Nice to be here.
We need her better mind to break this down because I think some of the terms can't fly over people's heads like it does mine. Explain to us, layman's terms, for a small brain like me to understand, what is AGOA all about?
So AGOA is the African Growth and Opportunity Act, as we know, and really it was created by the US Congress, or established by US Congress in 2000 as an opportunity to be able to have trade relations with sub-Saharan African countries. It's supposed to be a win-win scenario, for both the United States and African countries. And of course, the great thing is that African countries that are eligible for AGOA are able to export into the US market duty-free on a preferential basis.
Break down these benefits, macro level, Africa, and then down to South Africa.
So the great thing for Africa, obviously, is that there's a deliberate unilateral act by the United States to export into the largest economy in the world.
Right.
And, that obviously comes with a lot of opportunities. But the difficulty has been, as you mentioned, is that South Africa is one of the largest beneficiaries of AGOA, as are a few others, the likes of Madagascar, Lesotho and Kenya. They're among the 82% of countries that actually do export. Whereas the rest, yes, there's some who do export, but they're not able to take full advantage of the opportunity to export to the US market because of a lack of capacity on several fronts.
Talk to us about, you mentioned this a little earlier on. Is it mutually beneficial in terms of those countries on the African continent as well as America? What does America get out of this?
Well, that's a good question. I think America benefits in more ways than one. On the economic front, it does benefit. We were told by Catherine Tai that 155,000 US jobs depend on AGOA. So that's quite significant. That's a lot of families. So that's very impactful. And then on the African side, well, if we look at South Africa as an example, which has been the greatest beneficiary of AGOA, it's been hugely beneficial. If you look at our motor industry, it's been a massive beneficiary. When AGOA first started, I think they were exporting a couple of 100 million worth of cars to the US. Now we're talking about a market of about 1.8 billion. So it's huge. It's absolutely huge. So for the auto sector, it's been very beneficial. Our citrus sector has also been beneficial, and so on.
So I want to talk about what's some of the conversations that we heard about during this forum. There's been calls for AGOA to be enhanced, evolve, so to speak. In what way can it? Where's the room?
So, okay, what they're speaking to is countries like South Africa can easily benefit, no problem whatsoever, except of course we have the issue of our ports. We're not able to fully maximize because we have port issues, so we can't export as much, whether it's mining or whatever it may be, because of that capacity constraint. With other African countries, the way that enhancement can come in, they have to do their bit and obviously create capacity to be able to better export. But on the US side, they actually assist with what they call technical assistance, where they enable countries to better understand how the American market works, how the technology, there's technology transfer that they can provide so that there's a seamless export process and so on. So also training, a lot of training that's involved. Catherine Tai also spoke about that being a very focused area that they want to look at going forward, so that more people, more countries can actually gain the benefit.
Lots happening. Geopolitics. What are some of the risks given this current state of play?
Well, you will have noticed that Trade and Industry Minister Ibrahim Patel was pushing on behalf of the African states that there be authorization of AGOA, which is set to expire in September 2025. That is early 2024. They want that assurance so that investors have the confidence to invest, and they want it to be a longer period. President Ramaphosa stressed that it should be for a longer period than, say, 10 years. So the possible challenges are, we are in a geopolitical difficulty at the moment. We know that people in the US, some people in the US have not been happy with South Africa's stance on the Ukraine war, the Ukraine-Russia war. And also now, I mean, South Africa, or at least the ANC government, has never hidden its colors about being supportive to this Palestinian cause. And even if recently a US senator just came out just a couple of days ago, sending a letter to Secretary Blinken saying that South Africa should not be included going forward because of their seeming support for Palestine. You'll remember Naledi Pandor is said to have made a call to a representative of Hamas soon after things kicked off from the 7th of October, and some did not take too kindly to that. But she says that she made the call to try and see what sort of assistance South Africa could give to the Palestinian people.
When could we know in terms of the renewal, especially for South Africa? I know the United States, it goes to the Congress. They got their own domestic issues as well. Just recently, they have a new speaker, so they've got a number of bills that they need to process. When are we likely to know?
That's very difficult to respond to, because, like you say, their political situation internally hasn't been, smooth. They've just got a new speaker, as you say. Really important legislation that they've had to be putting through in terms of budget has had to be postponed because they can't get their heads together on a bipartisan basis. So what more, a little, frivolous act, such as AGOA about Africa is probably one of the last things that's on their mind. But Africa is an important market for the United States, because the United States realizes that China has incurred quite a lot in Africa, and this is an area of real competition, and that's the leverage that Africa probably has, because it can't really dictate to the United States, make sure that the authorization is this time or that time. It's really up to the US Congress if they can have a meeting of minds. But for the fact that they realize, that is, the United States realize that Africa is a playing ground for China, and we also have critical minerals for investment in renewable energy, technologies and so on and so forth. We are a place that needs to be invested in, and in a few years' time we are going to have a massive population which should have massive potential if invested in now. Hence the mutual beneficial agreement that you were talking about as well. Good to have you on the program as always. Thanks for making the time. Value added indeed, Nompude. We will discuss this further. Context, always important. Nompumelelo Ziziba, SABC News Economics Senior Editor. That's what we do on It's Topical. We bring in the people, the better minds, so you benefit. All right, the African Growth Opportunity Act set to expire in about 2 years' time. Stakes, though, remain high, right, after the 20th forum hosted by South Africa. Let's find out more. This insert by producer Xolani Ringane. It sums up the expectations.
It was not just an ordinary meeting. It was a diplomatic move to strengthen the US-Africa trade bond. And the message by the host president, loud and explicit.
Gone should be the days when Africa is just seen as a source of rock, soil, dust being exported out of our continent. We now want to produce the products that are finished or near finished that are utilized in other parts of the world. We want to earn full value for our products.
The US flagship trade pact is viewed by some as an answer to unlocking economic opportunities.
AGOA gave us the opportunity to access a much bigger market. There's certain cities within the US that have a bigger GDP than the total South African economy. So there's huge opportunity. We've only been able to tap into a fraction of that, which obviously gives us a benefit on our side, where we are able to increase our revenue and in turn our profitability.
But the trade deal is not without challenges.
So the biggest challenge that I think any firm would face, or any business would face, whether it's a big company or small company in South Africa or in the region, is that although there is AGOA and it gives preferential treatment to certain products and categories and commodities, without the trade promotion around that, I think that is the most difficult challenge to overcome.
Meanwhile, stakes remain high for South Africa.
AGOA has political criteria that South Africa satisfies hands down. I mean, in terms of pluralism and rule of law and accountable governments and to elections and all of that. But to have some predictability in the U.S.-South African relationship, even though we have policy differences on particular issues like the Middle East right now, and yet we can work together and we can find common ground, and that's, I think, the most hopeful sign, provided we have leaders of the quality of Cyril Ramaphosa and Joe Biden.
AGOA has been a leeway to boost trade between the United States and sub-Saharan Africa. Whilst other African countries have lost their AGOA status, some businesses in South Africa claim to be benefiting from it. For It's Topical, I am Xolani Ringane, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Olani, thank you very much indeed for that report. So, a regular word on the street feature. We roamed Johannesburg streets seeking to gather people's understanding of the trade initiative, AGOA. We received a range of diverse insights and perspectives. This is what you had to say. Watch.
The African Growth and Opportunity Act was passed by President Clinton, I think back in 2000, and the idea was to help sub-Saharan African economies to grow and get trade opportunities into the US. So it's a US piece of legislation.
From my understanding, AGOA is African Growth Opportunities Act. Basically, it was created to facilitate trade between the United States and sub-African countries.
It is a privilege to Africa to go through AGOA because those business people, they don't pay tax and they don't pay custom duties as well when they deal with America through AGOA. And that is why I think it's very, very important for South Africa to be part of it.
It's a deal between the US and African countries on trade. It's an okay setup because it works for African countries, but the Western countries should not try to use it as a control mechanism to control foreign policy of African countries.
AGOA stands for African Growth and Opportunity Act, and it's mainly about the US and Africa program aimed at the trade between the two countries, or the sub-Saharan African countries.
It's an amazing piece of legislation when one considers the interdependence of South Africa and the United States, and mostly the trade imbalance where South Africa benefits from being able to sell into the United States. Consider things like the automotive industry and the benefits we get from the automotive industry.
Right, so we really appreciate your thoughts on this. Let's get straight into it, get you a better understanding. Hopefully by the end of tonight's program, you'll have a sound understanding of whether AGOA is worth it or not, especially for South Africa. The better minds on the program tonight. Thank you very much indeed. Gregory Mofokeng is Black Business Council Vice President. Good to have you on the program. We also have virtually, we have Victor Kgomoeswana, the author of Africa is Open for Business and Africa Bounces Back. We also have Matthew Parks, COSATU Parliamentary Coordinator. Good to have them on the program. And also our digital audience. We're going to get their take as well. Throw in a few questions for our guests. Appreciate all of your time. Greg, to you first, with regards to the current challenges that, in particular, South Africa faces. AGOA needs to be relevant, it needs to be inclusive and effective. Is it?
Well, to a certain extent it is, but we want to enhance that. I think you've looked at the figures earlier. You'll see that last year we exported 68 billion rands worth of goods into the US. So it does have an impact. However, the theme, and I think the central focus of the discussions has been around how do we enhance AGOA so that it can do more for us.
Yeah. Victor, if I can bring you into the conversation, if you can unmute. AGOA, it's been around for what, 2 decades now, but a lot has changed since then. Economies have changed, challenges have crept in. The economic fallout from COVID-19, economic insecurity, just to mention a few. What would you say AGOA needs to be in order to effect better change on the ground?
Good evening, Blaine. It doesn't have to be anything other than a win-win arrangement. I'm only happy that President Ramaphosa was able to stand his ground on the Russia issue and didn't allow himself to be opposed, because if you recall, this forum nearly did not happen, Blaine. It was a matter of South Africa is to align to Russia. Why would it be happening there when we... And then you have a lot of other allegations about South Africa's Middle East stance and all that. I'm a big fan of multilateralism. We're in the era where we are no longer dealing with the Cold War divide of America versus Russia, where you were either for the East or for the West, or from the capitalists or the communists. We have to make sure that countries are respected for their ability to build relationships multilaterally. And the fact that China, when AGOA was signed, was doing maybe $2 billion worth of trade with the rest of the African continent, and now it's at $280 or so billion a year, whereas America with Africa is still doing maybe $50 billion, tells you the reason that AGOA has to be maintained, it has to grow, because America knows if it does not grow its trade with the African continent, it would have just left too much money on the table for China.
You heard from Nompu earlier on that it's a two-way street. US benefits also as well. But, you touched on something earlier, and I want to just get your take on this with regards to South Africa's foreign policy and how it impacts on the way forward in terms of AGOA, South Africa's current stance in terms of the Israel-Hamas war, the Russia-Ukraine conflict as well. Do you think that shifts the needle for the United States at all? And to what extent, if so?
No, the United States has had a role in the Middle East crisis. It is the last country to point fingers. So all I'm saying is this. America has to understand that countries have a right to build relationships with other countries of the world. Just like they have an alliance with Israel the way they do, African countries have a right to have relationships with those. It wouldn't shift the needle except if it teaches African countries that they should not allow themselves to be pushed about and let America tell them which countries should be their friends or which countries they should hate. We are long past that era where we are just trying to please the one side of the Cold War divide.
Matthew Parks, fair labor practice within business, extremely important, you would agree. So having said that, labor should be taken along for the ride as well. With regards to AGOA, along this journey, not for the ride, along this journey. Your thoughts on how beneficial AGOA is currently for South Africans?
No, good evening. Thanks for having us. Look, for us as COSATU, in effect, the entire trade union movement across South Africa, all federations, but also the trade union movement across Africa and the US. We're supportive of it. We think it's done well. It's helped to create many thousands of jobs in South Africa. For example, the motor manufacturing industry, clothing and textiles, agriculture, chemicals, jewelry, many other critical export sectors to the US. We also should bear in mind that as South Africa, we have an unemployment rate of 42%, a youth unemployment rate of 60%, and our fundamental mandate as a trade union movement is to defend all possible jobs and to see how can we reduce unemployment, not only for South Africa, but also for Africa, because South Africa cannot be a sea, relatively speaking, on an island of prosperity, to see a poverty. We need to see Africa develop. Otherwise, there's a huge migration pressure on us. We also want to see how can we attract investment from the United States in Africa and South Africa's industrial development, economic development, and so forth. So there are many good aspects to AGOA, but also we think that we need to not simply settle for an extension, but see how can we enhance it. Because you find that many African countries like Chad and Central Africa and so on, who are AGOA members, but the exports under AGOA to the US are barely nothing. So we needed to see how can we give support to emerging African economies, like around access to finance, logistics support, marketing, and so forth. And of course, as South Africa too, we need to see how can we really utilize it to drive our industrial development. But for us, what's critical is to promote trade between South Africa and all countries across the world. And obviously, the US is the largest economy in the world.
How to fully utilize? That's an important point that Matthew raises, Gregory. Do you think businesses understand the full benefits of AGOA and how to go about accessing these benefits of this preferential treatment?
Some business do, some business don't. And I think that's the role of business organizations like ourselves, to make sure that information is available to those who don't understand how to fully utilize this instrument called AGOA. And that's where the focus is now, to say, how do we then ensure that those companies that are set up to manufacture and export to the US are able to do so meaningfully. And I think earlier you've heard that, we spoke about technical support that will come from the US and investment support that will come from the US. And I think the objective there is to make sure that when that investment comes and the support comes, it can go then and be accessible to those companies that do need to understand how to do business under this instrument called AGOA. So we do need to do more to make sure that we broaden the base of companies that can export to the US.
Yeah, access to information, really key. Let's go to our digital audience now, get their take. Jody, to you first, if you can unmute your take on whether or not South Africa should be in AGOA or not.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for having me. I don't necessarily disagree or agree with AGOA. I just think that these eligibility requirements, as it relates very interestingly to foreign policy, needs to be ironed out. We cannot compromise our own national security, our own foreign policy objectives for that of the US. I know that is one of the requirements, but that cannot happen.
Right.
We have to remain steadfast in our positions, non-alignment, pro-Palestinian, with Russia developing those relationships. It cannot compromise our relationships within BRICS either. So, there's a lot of leeway to be had. We can work on those things, but my concern lies with the geopolitical element of the discussion. How are we going to be able to incorporate it in a way that secures our own interests first and foremost? Because it's not merely, it's not a trade agreement. This is a political tool. That's what AGOA is, right? So we need to operate within that paradigm, firstly.
Interesting. Victor, let me bring you in to respond to what Jody had to say. And just to take it further, look, on one hand, you have America with their set of requirements, their expectations, their principles, etc. Strong historic ties, notwithstanding, right, between America and South Africa. Then on the other hand, you have a fast emerging global South as well. How difficult is it to balance the past with the future at this given time?
I wouldn't say it's difficult to balance the past unless you consider your country to be shall I say, a stooge of the other. I mean, the past is the past where we've come from. America dominated. It is aware that there's a power shift from the west to the east. It is aware of that. South Africa recently joined BRICS, or became a member of BRICS, and BRICS has become a bigger bloc of nations now. It's no longer just Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. It's got 6 other countries that made it to account for over 70% of the world GDP, which means South Africa now belongs to those multilateral or multinational agencies or blocs that make it have some kind of bargaining power, something it did not have even when AGOA was brought into being. Balancing the past is just, I'll keep going back to the multilateralism. We have come to the past, from the past where you either were with NATO and its allies, or you were with USSR. The Cold War ended, the Berlin Wall fell, and therefore nations are showing that non-alignment is a much better way to go forward, and that's the path South Africa has taken. You are non-aligned in the sense that you go with what you can defend. If you can't defend something, you cannot say, I am with this country because we belong to NATO together, or we belong to this country, block of nations together. So that balance is about just understanding that the power balance in the world has shifted. There's a more emphasis of multilateralism rather than just being binary in the way we look at the world affairs.
Molatelo, I see your hand up. Kustas Knowledge. Let's go to Molatelo first.
Yes, good evening to the viewers. Good evening, everyone in studio. I think as South Africa, what that was previously mentioned, we shouldn't be putting ourselves in one side or the other. I think what is important is to try and open up the market for also the smaller businesses. We need to create, not sort of create, but we need to sort of loosen the red tape, because I believe that there's a red tape with regards to young agricultural farmers and citrus farmers who are struggling to break into the market. For example, we're experiencing a supposed shortage in eggs and chicken, but I can tell you now, people from the villages are willing and able and ready to supply those chickens and eggs because they have them at their disposal. We have a lot of poultry farmers who are struggling to break into the market and actually supply these big corporations and stuff like that. And if we empower those, if we are able to empower those small businesses, then it should bode well for our economy as well, because the money will also still be circulating within the South African economy. So for me, it's just about the red tape for small businesses to enter the market, and not to confine ourselves to saying, but we need to strictly go with AGOA and keep it at that. yeah, that's what I wanted to write.
That's important. Before we go to break, Matthew Parks, I just want to bring in with regards to what Moletelo has said. Is business and workers thinking in this way in terms of manufacturing and producing for global consumption rather than domestic?
Yeah, look, we have to do both, and they complement each other. You know, China, the US, many other countries, Europe, for example, big economies, successful economies, grew because they produce for domestic demand, but simultaneously they also produce for export demand. We have to do that as well. There's a need to increase our exports to the US, for example, as the largest economy. Equally, there's a need for us to increase our exports to China, second largest economy. Strategically, we also have to realize that South Africa, our fundamental, most strategic market destination is, of course, the African continent, the Southern African region. So we have to, target all of these markets. It's also critical that we diversify our trade as much as possible in addition to expanding, because there will always be global ups and downs. China might have a bit of an economic slump. Russia's experiencing sanctions right now. You might find Brazil's got certain issues to Africa too. You can't control these issues, whether it's economic or political and so on. But how do you grow your export base? How do you diversify it, etc.? So that you protect your economy, you protect your domestic workforce. Yeah. You really see how we use it to reduce unemployment, reduce poverty. We have to look at what our niche industries too. How can we exploit them? How can we intensify them? And I think one critical thing, one really positive thing about AGOA is that how it's helped actually unintentionally to integrate Southern Africa. So, for example, Botswana's exports to the United States is a small amount of about $1 million a year, but its exports to South African companies, in terms of the wire harnessing, it's about $106 million. Those are then included in South African car exports to the US. So that's been a positive thing. Similarly with Lesotho too, there's a huge growth in Lesotho's textile industry as well, and that benefits South Africa because if Lesotho does well, South Africa does well because of our inherent political relationships. I think there's many opportunities for us to really unpack and see how to expand more to benefit local businesses, local jobs, and our broader economic development as a continent and a country.
Matthew, thank you. We're going to need to take a quick break. Matthew touched on something very interesting there as well. With regards to other African countries, you know that Joe Biden informed Congress that they're about to terminate the beneficiary designations, that's the word, beneficiary designations of 4 African countries. What sort of signal does that move send to the rest of the continent? We will discuss next. Welcome back. You're watching It's Topical. That acronym, AGOA, you've been seeing a lot for the past week or so. What's it all about? The beneficiary to you, your family, your community. That's what we aim to do tonight, to break it down in bite-sized pieces so you have a sound understanding in terms of what this is all about. Let's remind you about our question tonight, and we're asking you, what kind of opportunities do you expect following the conclusion of the 20th AGOA Forum in South Africa? Let us know at It's Topical SABC on X. Let's take it to our guest, Gregory Mofokeng, with regards to township economy. Important. We're kind of breaking it down to how we can benefit from a community point of view. We had reporting where entrepreneurs in townships saying they want to be part of AGOA. Again, we're talking about producing for global or manufacturing for global consumption. How can we find that space within the international market?
We can definitely find that space, and I think it also goes back to the question that Moletelo asked to say, what about this red tape? Unfortunately, when it comes to AGOA, there is red tape, there is criteria that we've got to meet. And so, if one looks at a township economy, if one is manufacturing clothes specifically for the US market, there's a way in which you've got to design the factory, and the garments that you are producing have to meet a specific criteria on the other side for it to reach the US. And therefore, that's why the technical advice is important. So these markets are actually reachable to township economies. It's about how do we then assist those township economies to set up specifically to service those markets. The criteria is going to be there, and there is assistance already in South Africa to say how do we then empower those companies to make sure that they are able to manufacture and export meaningfully to the US. So the criteria is there, the requirements are there, you've got to meet them.
Right. I apologize for my cough, just need to clear the throat. So, Kustas, let's bring you in with regards to your take on AGOA.
Yes, good evening, Blaine. Firstly, let's answer a a simple question. Where does a person go who's listening at home now if they want to be able to reach the American market? Let's direct people to SARS website. It's important that there is a AGOA visa application at SARS website. There is also AGOA textile certificate of origin. And within that website, there's also AGOA export application.
Right.
And also there's AGOA manufacturer's registration application. So SARS in 2021 updated the e-filing system to make it easier for someone to register via e-filing for registration and of course for licensing so that they can trade to the American. So here's a question, then here's a point. So whoever is listening at home, they want to be part of the American economy. Go to the SARS website. The visa application is there. All the other things that I mentioned. So the question that Manager would say then is, look, what do they do? Where do they go?
Right.
Go to the SARS, follow all the rules and all the stuff that has been said there, like Gregory has mentioned. There is a criteria. SARS has made it available, made it easier for anyone to do that. So it's within our reach. That's the first part I wanted to get into. The second part, I'm fascinated with the manner in which we speak about the American market and Americans in general. I was listening to Victor here. We speak as if we do not need the Americans. And yet, here we are with our economy at doldrums. And let me be very clear, we are losing jobs. And we are playing politics at the expense of people's lives. Now, here's the thing. We should be exporting more to the American market than we are doing. Instead, you know what we are doing? We are playing what we call Russian games. How much is how much is a Russian market versus the American market? It's a drop in an ocean. So let's speak in a manner that will promote South Africa's interests. Let's not speak as if we don't need them. Here's the thing, we need them desperately if we're going to uplift this economy from 0.7 to 5%. So what am I saying? I'm saying, when I blame to say that the manner in which we conduct our foreign policy has cost us dearly because some of our goods are on tariffs today when they should not have been under tariffs.
Right.
Had we played our cards correctly. And I think that let's look at this and let's not forget that politicians don't care much about people. It's the businesses behind the scenes that are supporting lives that are at stake. I would like to stop right there.
Thanks a lot, Kustas. Princey, what do you reckon?
Good evening, Blaine, and to everyone who's tuned in. Mine is a question to the panel. In light of those countries that have been removed from AGOA's eligibility, such as the Central Republic of Congo, Niger, Uganda, and I think those three that I can remember, what strategies that we can use, especially led by South Africa, in order to help them regaining their access and maximizing the benefits of the AGOA?
Good question. Do we have Victor? I don't see Victor on my screen, but okay, we lost Victor. Matthew Parks, what do you reckon in terms of what sort of move and does that signal, removing those 4 countries, to Princey's point?
Yeah, look, for us, we want to see all African countries being included. We don't think we should be punishing innocent people for the mistakes, for the bad behavior of politicians. African countries are seriously underdeveloped. Huge rates of unemployment, real poverty, and promoting trade between the US and Africa and all parts of the world is critical to uplifting people. We understand the criteria, and look, this is a US legislation, so the US obviously set the criteria. So it penalizes those countries which have military coups, like in Gabon or Niger and so on. And they recently added Uganda because of the criminalization of people who are gay and so forth. We think that it's a difficult one. We look at the need to tolerate military coups, to tolerate governments which abuse human rights, abuse workers' rights. So, for example, Mauritania had been removed previously because of this serious issues of forced labor there, modern day slavery.
Yeah.
So we have to find the right balance between dealing with governments who abuse people, but also I think at the same time we should really not punish innocent workers who are not the cause of the misbehavior of the government. In fact, they are the victims. So I think for us, we're keen to have engagement with the US was raised in the AGOA forum. We need to find the right balance. But also equally, governments which misbehave too should actually look at themselves and address their own behavior as well.
All right, hands up already. Mpo, we've got Magezi. If you can fix up your lighting, Magezi, I think we're battling to see you there. Knowledge and Sitole. Mpo, to you first.
I think I just have two questions. Good evening, first of all. But the two questions I have are, the first one would be, how can we, specifically as South Africans, utilize our AGOA membership to facilitate intercontinental trades? Because there are countries that are in Africa that are not member states of AGOA. And we have a beautiful relationship. So with Lesotho, for example, they are a member state. And when it comes to our automobile industry, they help us with supplying leather for cars. And when you look at Botswana, they help us with wiring harnesses, right? So the first question would be, how do we then better utilize the platform we have so that we can help other countries that we are currently working with? And then another thing would be something that has already been discussed and mentioned, but very recently, our eligibility was put into question because of our relationship with Russia. And there were even conversations about moving the summit from South Africa to a different country. So going forward, we know that essentially if you are not in line with American or their positionality in terms of their politics, you can be sanctioned. You know, you do face a certain death. So what is our solution? What have we put in? Have we as South Africa to avoid that, so that it does not affect our trade with the US and then therefore our relationships with other countries?
Right. Let me take the last one to Victor. To Gregory. Look, I guess it's America's prerogative. If they come up with a program like this, they can call the shots. But it's up to countries like South Africa and other African countries whether to accept it or not. How can we kind of maintain our posture on the continent while prescribing or kind of taking into consideration what America is expecting from us?
Well, as you rightfully said, I mean, it is a U.S. instrument, so they have the prerogative to set the criteria. I think from our side, we would like to see all sub-Saharan African countries benefiting from AGOA. And interesting enough, we did have a discussion around the Africa Free Trade Continental Agreement. The Secretary General was there, and so we spoke about the alignment between AGOA and the CFTA. So what is happening now is that the countries that are participating meaningfully and are increasing the participation in their quota are doing so because they've got strategies that are being implemented in country to make sure that they benefit. We had wonderful stories from Nigeria, from Ghana, where they are really doing a lot as countries to ensure that they can increase their participation as far as their quotas is concerned. And I think this is what we had advised other countries to do so that they can be able to increase their participation. There's a lot that countries can do internally to make sure that they can participate meaningfully. And of course, we'd like to see everybody participating. As business, we can only whisper to government to say, look, let's get the geopolitics right, and make sure that the countries do comply with the criteria from the US.
What about intra-continental trade as an offshoot to AGOA, to Mpo's point?
The issue of regional value chains was also discussed quite extensively, and it is exactly to Mpo's point that we are now seeing that the intra-continental trade does position sub-Saharan Africa to participate as a bloc meaningfully as far as AGOA is concerned. So we're definitely seeing more and more collaborations between countries, between companies that are trading and operating in various countries on the continent to make sure that we create those regional value chains that are important for us to be able to export those manufactured goods to the US.
All right, let's take it back to our digital audience. Knowledge, to you first.
Okay, thank you very much, and good evening to the viewers. I would like to start by saying I really appreciate AGOA. It is quite a helpful tool, especially to countries who can produce, or to countries who have something to export. But otherwise, to the rest of the African countries, like your Uganda, who are being expelled from AGOA, I don't think the expulsion means a lot to them because they don't have much to export. Right. I would also want to focus on these countries which are being expelled. As I have mentioned before, I feel like AGOA is not being used as an economic or a trade tool, but it is used to make sure that African countries fall in line. So if you don't fall in line with what the Americans are saying, then you have to be punished using AGOA. To me, that is a very big problem because it means African countries need to sacrifice their sovereignty in order to be part of this AGOA, while at least some of them are not even benefiting much. But to countries like South Africa, I feel like it is quite beneficial. The same way I feel the African free trade area will benefit countries like South Africa because they have the capacity to produce. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Knowledge. Let's play devil's advocate here for a bit, and this is the pushback that you might get. Lungile, I mean, if somebody says, okay, citizens in South Africa are benefiting, given that you have to fall, quote unquote, for what Knowledge has said, fall in line with whatever America is saying we need to do. But if citizens are benefiting, what's the big deal, Lungile?
Evening also to the co-guest virtual and the viewers. Yeah, the question here should be, how do people from the deep rural village benefit? And also, how do we deal with eradicating unemployment rate? Because if you can check the statistics, it's very high. And also, how do we educate people on how to register their business, how to comply with SARS? So it's the issue which needs the state which is willing to implement such proposal in order to boost our economy. Thank you.
Yeah. No, that's an important point. That's what it boils down to, isn't it? In terms of accessing from grassroots level. Magezi, I'm going to give you a shot. I know we can hardly see you, but we'll probably cover your picture, but I'll give you a shot because you've been holding on. Magezi, please talk to us with regards to your take.
Yes, thank you, Blaine. I think the issue again it's a lot shedding, but I need you to understand one thing, Blaine. America, we understand that the one who's calling short, but a manner in which they dictate terms to South Africa, it tells us that we have to follow directly orders from them. We don't have a stand to say that as a South Africa, we have a right and a choice to choose exactly where to fall. Because when you understand and when you go through the report that has been published as a census from the Office of the United States by Trade Representatives, which is the report of 2021, it shows the position of South Africa. How do we stand? Even a manner in which we do our trade. It means we are topping the charts. So I don't see any reason when they can try to point us with a gunpoint to say that if you don't do this, or if you don't do this, or you do against us, therefore, when come to the term of the membership, we are going to terminate, so that you have to be at our side. Therefore, you should have indulgence to extend the membership. That's not the way it's supposed to be. I think just sending the very bad signal. Just we can dictate terms regardless of the manner in which you do our trade. What I love about the representative of South Africa, they've stand the ground to say that we have a choice and we know exactly what we want as a country. Okay, and they even showed their support when they supported the Palestine. That as a South African, we have the right to choose exactly what we want and how we are to be treated. We need to be respected. Thank you very much, please.
All right. So thank you very much indeed, Zita. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. It just flies. But we do appreciate your points as well. Gregory, thank you very much for making the time. Matthew Parks, Victor, and our digital audience, value added indeed. No doubt we've got a clearer understanding of what this AGOA is all about. But before we go, here's my take. Part of the objectives of the AGOA legislation, it's trade and investment, it's about deepening it, right? Economic growth, also development. I heard National Security Advisor Dr. Sidney Mufamadi say a couple of months ago that if you oversimplify how much South Africa stands to lose in terms of rands and cents, if we're not part of AGOA, we will be failing to understand that this country's position is inextricably bound up with the position of other countries on the continent. I guess it talks to South Africa's position on the continent and the need for strategic diplomatic relations, right? But what needs to be on top of mind for our leaders is safeguarding the country's economic interests, and by extension, its citizens. It should be all about sustainable and equitable growth. That will be key in unlocking the full potential of this country's citizens. And that's my take. If you miss anything, be sure to watch this episode of It's Topical on YouTube. Sports Live up next. If you're watching a repeat of this program, then as always, the news continues. Until next week, my brothers and sisters, take care. Bye-bye.